Greetings! This is I, Tempest Van Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome one and all. Are you ready to dive back into the Pathfinder world of Golarion? Because that's where we're headed to today. Whether, of course, you're joining me live on Twitch over here, or joining me later on YouTube. You guys on YouTube, remember to do all that normal, basically stuff that you kind of have to do there, liking, ringing the bell, subscribing, all that stuff. My question for either of you today is, have you played Lashunta? And I will include Starfinder in this case, because the Lashunta are an interesting people that were introduced in fairly early on in Pathfinder lore, were developed heavily in Starfinder, and have been edited since in 2nd edition. So, let me get the thing off of the side of the mountain here too. I do not have the 2nd edition version of the information here, because the main amount of updates here appears in the book. Let's just talk about the books. We can kind of dive into this as we mentioned the books here too. So I guess we should start with the books that are the older ones that you would check out. And there is quite a few of them. Children of the Void from Second Darkness is an introduction. Distant Worlds. Numeria deals with them to some degree. The Iron Gods, the Divinity Drive deals with them for some degree. Inner Sea Races deals with their stats from 2nd edition. So all of those establish society and the way they work. Here we're dealing with the stats, People to Stars the same way, and Inner Sea Bestiary. And when we get to 2nd edition, The Gatewalkers, the Seventh Arch, which is a book from last year in January, hence why I don't have a copy of it, really updates it. And this includes a lot of the updates from the Starfinder sources, which occur after here. Again, I guess I should start with what their dynamic was and what you should understand their dynamic as. I'm not 100% sure what their dynamic is completely now. But basically they have two forms, two castes. They talk about this more in Starfinder. They develop this more in the update of them. The fact is, originally it was a gender dimorphism between these species, but now they made it that it is self-determinate at puberty. Now, whether or not there are certain aspects of this which were in the old are there, I cannot say. So I'm going to talk about them, and I'm going to put these caveats of, you should check this book here for the most up-to-date information. Again, there's a book I don't have right now. I might get in the future, but I have a lot of the other sources. So it's like, wow, a lot of the 2nd edition new books, I'm a mixed bag whether I have them or not, unfortunately. Some I do, some I don't. You know, it's a lot of the newer books, you know, just getting them and keeping up with some of them have been a little bit more challenging as the last few years. I'm trying my best from using the older books plus online sources to give you the best picture of things. So I am using the wiki page, which helps with a lot of the updates from that. A lot, and I was referencing things like the old 1st edition archives and Memphis. Alright, let's talk about them. And we should really start out with, there's a picture of one of them, a female one, a woman, Lashunta, that's watching over a city-state she's a member of with her Shalashu mount in Castrol. So that's the first thing we have to talk about. They are humanoid species native to the continent of Asana, on the planet Castrol. They're well-educated, they're civilized people. That's the beginning of what we start out by talking about them. And they look fairly standard humanoids. They have a dimorphism to them that originally was sexual, but has been updated since then. We'll talk about that in a minute there. But the most obvious thing is they do have a thin pair of antennae that sprout from just below their hairlines. Their two forms are one that is compact, muscular, and the other is tall-lipped and somewhat, compact, muscular, tall-lipped are their two forms. And they look very different between the two of them. Now, these do divide up into a physical difference between them that divides into the two castes they have, which is an interesting thing, too, because it is a little bit cultural. But it is something that is chosen at puberty, which direction they develop to. It's not a hereditary thing. They develop one or two directions as part of their own natural species. They can basically willingly choose the direction they go. Now, in the traditional sense of the older books, it was females that went into the one form and males the other. I'll talk about that. Know whether or not there is a preference still towards one or the other. I can't say. I haven't seen that book. There might not be at this point in time with the way they go about, and certainly by Starfinder there probably isn't a preference at all. But the two castes are the Damia and Korasha. The Damia are the taller ones. They tend to be the leaders and communicators. The Korasha are stout, tend towards physically demanding jobs. They both have connections to intellectual matters, so that's an important part of it. And certainly so it was the taller females, shorter males in the old book that they've kind of moved away from. Again, they're all intelligence. They prize magical, mental, and psychic potential over physical prowess. No matter what side you're on, intellect is a very key part of it. They are one of the more populous intelligent species other than elves and Formians on Castrovel. Because of a lot of the interplanetary chain connections that have been in existence, such as the Elven Igoras, the Elf Gates, they know about other planets. There are people that are aware of other worlds. So that is an important thing, that they understand interplanetary portals and they're linked to planets and other ones. And so, particularly they have close bonds with people of Akaton, but they will know about Golarion. While Golarion may not know about these people at all, or this planet at all, they know about Golarion. Now, here's the other part of the entire thing about the forms. I don't know if this is accurate anymore either. In the old culture, they were towards matriarchal. Remember, in the old way, it was females versus males. Maybe now it still has a level of that dimorphism. I would say check the book out to be sure. I'm not sure if they mention it at all, that, if females tend towards one or males towards the other, or if it's a 50-50 split as the new way of doing it. Honestly speaking, I could see that they could possibly just have it then, rather than use the old way, but combine it with the new way kind of thing. They might have done that, where, one kind of favors the other, but they still don't choose one particularly over the other. Yes. So, it is one of those things that when the lore is updated largely like this, it can be difficult to kind of think about it in a lot of ways. Okay. Here is the thing. I actually did look up in Starfinder just now, just to make sure. That, yes, as of Starfinder, so again, it could have been updated again in 2nd edition, they said that traditionally, more females head towards the Damia role, more males towards the Korasha role, but either could be there, and the Damia are the more leaders, so traditionally more females have been in leadership roles, but again, based on their society, leaders only arrive when needed, and whoever's best suited to it will become there too. And basically, both genders, both castes, basically, regardless of become warriors and adventurers. Telepathy is very useful in combat. But again, that's secondary concern to knowledge and intellectual desires. So, yes, I did. I had a feeling, because I've talked about Lashuntas before in my Starfinder videos. So, basically, the change is psychic-based in puberty. That they kind of go into one particular direction or another. And depending on where you are, they could steal you, but it's up to you to choose a lot of things. More traditionally, there probably is a things. And probably we're at a time when there might still be a little bit of gender imbalance, but by Starfinder, the gender balance becomes a little bit more equal. So keep that in mind, that, an interesting part of this entire thing still exists here. Anyway, that effectively is the basics of Lashunta. They look, except for the two basic forms and having the tendrils in their heads, they look very much so like any other humanoid. So, they live in scattered city-states, which is either ruled by an elected or hereditary ruler. The connections are strengthened through trade lines, interbreeding, defensive pacts, and conflict between these tends to limited to basically smaller feuds with honor or ceremonial combat rather than direct out war between various city-states. They're relatively peaceful. If they get into conflict between one city-state and another, they're going to settle it with something more ceremonial. Engaging in things like ritual combat, raiding each other. They are, even at times of the greatest disdain for each other, will band together for external threats. They have their own language called Lashunta, and they do rely on telepathic and magic communication between their city-states. Because Castrovil's warm and humid, they wear very few clothing, unless it's necessary to complete a task. So basically, they live in a place where they really don't need clothes. And then the Shalashu, their mounts, they form telepathic bonds with them, making them incredibly effective mounted combatants. And if a bonded Shalashu or rider dies, the surviving party suffers lasting emotional trauma. Okay. I'll kind of do this image here. Which isn't showing anything, but we'll maybe, talk quickly here on a small one, because it is a little risque. All Lashunta basically have are born with a psychic ability, and they do pursue a mental perfection. It's an admirable goal of their people. They have keen psionic powers, and that go through many members of. They're all members of their race. They're naturally telepathic and telekinetic, which especially prevalent among their warriors who bond with their mounts. And it does make Castrovel the solar system's dominant home of people with the psychic class, basically. Now, let's go to Golarion, because there are Lashunta on Golarion. How? Well, there was a tribe known as the Lotus Eaters that was collected by the crew of the starship Divinity. If you're unsure of who the Divinity is, it entered the Golarion star system, stopped by Castrovel to collect rainforest-dwelling life to supply one of its habitat pods. They placed them in stasis, and then they remained there until the starship crashed in Numeria. The Divinity is the starship crashed in Numeria. I have had an episode on Numeria. I've talked about androids. I've talked about a couple other species from other planets in the Golarion star system that have, in Numeria in that region. Now, many millennia later, a technically captain, a Evorian named Prosser, basically discovered them and revived them in an expedition to Silver Mount. Established a village within an isolated habitat zone and made himself the chieftain. Lady Olanta, who rules the Numerian city of Hakosis, is Lashunta who ride in the city while fleeing the Technic-Loop. Most believe her to be a Vorian. It's a cover that she maintains to basically avoid drawing unnecessary tension. So effectively, the Lotus Eaters have been woken up. They're alive again. They lost a couple of millennia. They're on Golarion. They're in a small village. And, well, again, you'd have to talk to the Iron God's Divinity Drive that deals with them in particular. Though, in the Numeria book, you get into a member of them, Lady Otola, who now is away from the Technic-Loop. So, probably Otola is basically working towards getting a lot of the aliens and androids that have been in these Numerian ruins out from under the area there and get them to be free. There are still other surviving species that were collected and stuff like that in small numbers here on Golarion. And certainly speaking, Lashunta can connect up on Golarion with the elves, and though they are on a new home and really don't have a home to go back to, they could connect up with their distant relatives on Castrovel. It's a possible storyline you could always explore in the Golarion world, and a member of them seeks to make establishment with the elves and their gates. Question. But, yeah, there is, let's get away from the very, very somewhat naked lady. Lashunta. That's what we talk about them for. It's an interesting group because I, honestly speaking, am wondering how 2nd edition has addressed this. Are they going with, it's the society that becomes the society in Starfinder, where, you know, evolving into a modern society, their people basically means that the Damia-Portia split is fairly egalitarian when it comes to male and female, but are we still seeing that point in time where there's a direction towards one or the other in the Pathfinder world, especially with the updated book? It makes me very curious. Again, because this is something that we can see an evolution of their species. Originally, when we saw them, we see, oh, it's just male and female have the two sides to it. But no, it technically becomes then that they can choose, because it's a psychic transformation. It's partially psychic as much as it's physical transformation into their two forms. And yeah, they find different roles. Again, it's a lot of interesting complexity to a species. And it certainly is a species. There's a lot of them. Yes, if we're talking about Golarion, their numbers are very low. But remember, they know about interplanetary portals on Castroval. One of them, for whatever reason, aka your character if you wanted, could have made a deal with the elves and traveled to Golarion. You could just be from Castroval. You don't have to be from Numeria. You could have been one that came in through the elf gates, through those portals, and now you find yourself on a planet you want to explore for some kind of reason. It might be difficult, you might be, have certain deal or something you have to do to go back home, but exploring an entirely other planet would be an interesting concept. And it's a very big option because, yeah, again, naturally speaking now, very rare on Golarion. But it's a possibility. And I think it's what makes them very interesting. And I definitely would recommend, if you want to do a little bit more research and get a little bit more confirmation there, definitely check out the 2nd edition book. The 7th Arch does a very good job of updating a lot of stuff, and especially because it deals with Castroval and has an entire section on it. That's why we get a big update on things there. Very interesting that way. Anyway, we'll leave it here today. I hope you enjoyed learning about them. Lashunta are very interesting people that I enjoy it because it reflects an interesting way of thinking of developing a species that, certainly speaking, sexual dimorphism, that's an idea that does exist in nature. It's kind of interesting. But making it linked to a psychic desire for a direction makes it much more interesting. And I feel like that's where this is a point in time where Paizo has developed something a lot more interesting and kind of changed it. Has not been an hour, and that no longer was pinned. Whatever. If you want to see more stuff, my tabletop stuff is live on Twitch, goes up on YouTube later on. If you want to join me live, it's Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, usually early to mid-afternoons. Saturday's a backup day if I miss any of those days. Crimson Queen, a live play Pathfinder 1st Edition. On Wednesdays at 9 p.m. EST, discussing tabletop. We talk about news of the week, deeper discussion topics into very interesting points of tabletop. Really recommend that section of the show, even if you don't see the news part. That's on Saturdays at 6. And then, of course, I do other gaming stuff, but everything goes up on YouTube. I have social media link below, so if you want to check that out to see my updates, cat pictures, and all that stuff, you can do that. That's mostly what I put there, going live notifications. Anyway, I'm going to get going. Everyone out there, have a great rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed this. And until the next time we talk about Pathfinder, Golarion, tabletop in general, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.